Ever wondered if a medieval king could get away with murder? Did peasants really get hanged for stealing bread? Was justice actually blind in the Middle Ages, or did it peek through its blindfold to check your social status first? Number 5. When your blood determined your punishment. Picture this: you're in medieval England. You've committed a crime. Your punishment depends not on what you did, but on who you are. Shocking, right? Medieval justice wasn't exactly known for being fair. If you were lucky enough to be born into nobility, the law treated you with kid gloves. If you were a commoner, well, tough luck. Take the case of Sir John Arundel in 1379. This wealthy nobleman led a group of soldiers who ransacked a nunnery, kidnapped several nuns, and then threw them overboard from ships to drown when a storm hit. His punishment: he had to pay a fine and was briefly out of royal favor. Meanwhile, a peasant caught stealing food to feed his family could be hanged without a second thought. The principle of one law for the rich, another for the poor wasn't just an unfortunate side effect of medieval justice, it was literally written into the system. Legal codes across medieval Europe explicitly stated different punishments based on social class. The 13th century legal text, Fleta, contains numerous examples of how the same crime should be punished differently depending on the offender's rank. Noble privilege in court wasn't just about getting lighter sentences. The entire process looked different depending on your social standing. A noble accused of a crime might be placed under comfortable house arrest in a castle, while a commoner would be thrown into a dank dungeon with no chance of bail. Nobles could often demand trial by combat or have a champion fight for them. Commoners, they got the rack, hot irons, and other delightful truth-finding tools of torture. In medieval France, the nobility could only be tried in the king's court or in parliament, where their peers would judge them. Meanwhile, commoners faced local courts where they had few rights and little hope of fair treatment. And when nobles were convicted of serious crimes, they often received the privilege of beheading rather than hanging, a quicker, less painful, and more dignified death. Even the practical application of justice showed the divide. When Sir Thomas Malory, yes, the guy who wrote about King Arthur's Round Table and chivalry, was accused of violent crimes including rape and attempted murder, he managed to escape justice repeatedly due to his connections. He was eventually imprisoned, but even then he had access to books and comfort that allowed him to write his famous works while serving time. This two-tiered system wasn't hidden or denied, it was celebrated as the natural order. The medieval mind saw society as a divinely ordained hierarchy. Nobles were believed to have literally better blood than commoners, so of course they deserved better treatment under law. Number 4. Crime and Punishment, Noble Edition. Did you know that nobles could literally get away with murder? How about the fact that a knight could kill a peasant and sometimes just pay a fine? The medieval justice system gave nobles a get-out-of-jail-free card that would make any Monopoly player jealous. When a nobleman committed a crime, his punishment often amounted to little more than a slap on the wrist. Consider the infamous case of Gilles de Rais, a 15th-century French nobleman who fought alongside Joan of Arc. Despite being convicted of murdering dozens of children in horrific ways, his noble status allowed him years of protection. Local authorities were afraid to investigate him because of his powerful position. It was only when he offended the church and the Duke of Brittany that he was finally brought to justice. Even when nobles faced severe punishment, they often had escape routes unavailable to commoners. Take benefit of clergy, for example. This legal loophole allowed anyone who could read, which usually meant nobles and clergy, to claim to be a cleric and transfer their case to more lenient church courts. The test: simply reading a passage from the Bible, often the same one every time, known as the neck verse, which some memorized specifically for this purpose. Nobles also had the privilege of trial by combat, allowing them to settle legal matters through fighting rather than traditional evidence-based trials. Why confess when you could just hire a skilled fighter to prove your innocence by beating your accuser to a pulp? Financial penalties hit differently too. A fine that would financially ruin a commoner's family for generations might be mere pocket change to a wealthy noble. In some medieval legal codes, the fine for killing a peasant was as low as 12 cows if you were a nobleman. The castle itself served as a legal sanctuary. Nobles could retreat behind their walls, effectively putting themselves beyond the reach of local law enforcement. When Lord John de Warenne murdered Alan La Zouch in Westminster Hall in 1270, right in front of royal justices, his punishment was a fine. Admittedly a large fine, but still just money for a murder committed in the very heart of royal justice. Exile was another noble-friendly punishment. Rather than face execution, nobles might be banished to comfortable estates abroad. King Edward II of England exiled his troublesome favorites Hugh Despencer and Piers Gaveston multiple times rather than executing them, though they did eventually meet grisly ends when political winds shifted. Perhaps most telling is the concept of restoration of honor that existed for nobles. A nobleman who committed a crime could often restore his standing through public penance or financial donations. His fundamental worth as a noble person remained intact. Commoners had no such concept available. Their worth was tied to their reputation, which once lost could rarely be recovered. Even the locations of punishment differed. Nobles were rarely subjected to the public humiliation of commoners. While a peasant might be put in stocks in the town square, nobles faced private punishment behind castle walls, protecting their dignity and reputation. Number 3. Rough justice, the commoner experience. Have you ever imagined being thrown in jail for not bowing deeply enough? Would you believe a farmer could lose his hand for hunting on the wrong land? Justice for medieval commoners was swift, brutal, and often arbitrary. If you were a peasant in medieval times, the law wasn't so much your protector as it was a constant threat hanging over your head. Take the forest laws in England after the Norman conquest. William the Conqueror declared vast tracts of land as royal forests where only nobles could hunt. A commoner caught taking a deer, even if his family was starving, faced horrific punishments including blinding or mutilation. During the 12th century, records show a group of commoners were castrated and had their eyes removed just for poaching deer in the king's forest. Public humiliation was a favorite punishment for common folk. The stocks and pillory exposed offenders to public ridicule and abuse. People threw rotten food, excrement, and stones at the helpless prisoner. For minor offenses like spreading gossip or selling bad bread, a baker might spend days in this position, often resulting in permanent injury or illness from exposure. Torture wasn't just for extracting confessions, it was entertainment. Public executions were festive events where families brought picnics. When the rebel William Wallace was executed in 1305, his punishment included being hanged, cut down while still alive, publicly emasculated and eviscerated with his entrails burned before his eyes, beheaded, and then cut into quarters. All this while a crowd cheered. Even the courts themselves were stacked against commoners. Manor courts run by the local lord or his steward handled most peasant crimes. Imagine being tried by your boss with no right to appeal. These courts imposed arbitrary fines that kept peasants in perpetual debt to their lords. Physical punishments for commoners were designed to mark them permanently. Branding, cutting off ears, slitting nostrils, these punishments ensured everyone would know you were a criminal forever. A branded thief would never get honest work again, essentially condemning them to a life of continued crime. Women from common backgrounds faced particularly harsh treatment. The ducking stool was used to punish scolds, women who argued too much or gossiped. The accused woman was strapped to a chair and repeatedly dunked in a river or pond. Many women drowned or died of shock during this ordeal. Even when commoners weren't being actively punished, the threat of law enforcement loomed large. The hue and cry system required all commoners to drop what they were doing and pursue any suspected criminal when the alarm was raised. Failure to participate could result in your own punishment. Justice was also financially devastating. Court fees, fines, and the need to bribe officials meant even a minor offense could ruin a peasant family. Records from medieval court rolls show families selling everything they owned just to pay fines for minor infractions. Perhaps most disturbing was the concept of collective punishment. Entire villages could be fined if a criminal wasn't caught in their jurisdiction. This created a system where peasants policed each other out of fear, turning neighbor against neighbor. Number 2, the church, a third justice system. Did you know there was a time when priests could commit murder and escape hanging? Have you ever wondered why someone would choose to be burned at the stake instead of simply repenting? While nobles and commoners faced different forms of secular justice, an entirely separate legal system existed alongside them: church law. This system cut across class lines in theory, but reinforced them in practice. The church's legal system, known as canon law, claimed jurisdiction over all spiritual matters and many worldly ones too. Crimes like heresy, blasphemy, sexual immorality, and witchcraft fell under church courts. These courts couldn't technically execute people, the church abhors bloodshed, but they could hand over offenders to secular authorities for execution after finding them guilty, a technicality that let them keep their hands clean. Benefit of clergy, mentioned earlier, created a massive loophole that primarily benefited the educated classes. By the late medieval period, this privilege had expanded beyond actual clergymen to anyone who could read. Since literacy was mainly limited to nobles and wealthy merchants, this created yet another way the elite could escape harsh punishments. The most notorious church court was the Inquisition, established to root out heresy. While popular imagination paints the Inquisition as universally brutal, the reality was more complex and often class-based. When nobles faced the Inquisition, they frequently received lighter penances like pilgrimages or donations. Meanwhile, common folks accused of the same heresies might face torture, imprisonment, or burning at the stake. Consider the case of Count Raymond VI of Toulouse during the Albigensian Crusade. Despite being a known protector of Cathar heretics, his noble status allowed him to avoid execution, his penance. Walking into church being flogged by the papal legate, humiliating but hardly comparable to the thousands of common Cathars burned at the stake. Sanctuary was another church-controlled legal concept that worked differently across class lines. Any criminal could claim sanctuary in a church for up to 40 days, after which they had to either face trial or confess and go into exile. For nobles, this was often enough time to arrange pardons or favorable treatment. For commoners, it merely delayed the inevitable. Church courts also handled all matrimonial issues, creating a fascinating dynamic where even the highest noble lady and the lowliest peasant woman theoretically answered to the same authority in matters of marriage. However, in practice, noble marriages received special dispensations and considerations that commoner unions never did. Penance itself varied by social status. A noble might be ordered to fund a chapel or go on a pilgrimage, potentially even enriching their worldly experience. A commoner would face public humiliation, wearing special clothes marking them as sinners, or severe physical mortification. Perhaps most interestingly, the church occasionally served as an equalizing force. Records show instances where church courts ruled in favor of peasants against their lords, particularly in disputes over tithes or church lands. These rare moments of justice across class lines highlight how exceptional such equality was in medieval society. Number 1, when justice was blind-ish, rare moments of equality. Could a peasant ever win against a knight in court? Was there ever a time when birth didn't determine your fate before the law? While medieval justice was overwhelmingly skewed by social class, fascinating exceptions existed where the scales of justice briefly balanced moments worth examining precisely because they were so unusual. Trial by ordeal temporarily leveled the playing field, at least in theory. These judgments of God included carrying hot iron, plunging an arm into boiling water, or being thrown into a lake while bound. Floating meant guilt, sinking meant innocence, though you might drown before being proven innocent. Divine judgment was supposedly blind to social status, making ordeals one of the few legal processes where commoners might stand equal chance against nobles. Until 1215, when the Fourth Lateran Council banned clergy participation in ordeals, these practices created rare instances where a peasant could be vindicated against a noble accuser. Historical records show occasional cases where commoners were acquitted through ordeals despite accusations from their social betters. The concept of outlawry crossed class boundaries in interesting ways. Anyone declared an outlaw literally outside the law lost all legal protections regardless of birth. Noble outlaws like the 14th century aristocrat Eustace Falville found that their privileged status meant nothing once outlawed. They could be killed by anyone without consequence, just like common bandits. This created a situation where, paradoxically, nobles and commoners might find themselves equally unprotected. Urban centers developed their own legal codes that sometimes transcended traditional class boundaries. The emerging merchant class in medieval towns created pressure for more egalitarian laws protecting commerce. In some free cities, guild membership could protect a commoner merchant almost as effectively as noble birth protected aristocrats elsewhere. The Magna Carta of 1215, while primarily protecting noble rights against royal power, established principles that eventually expanded to broader concepts of justice. Its famous clause, "To no one will we sell, to no one will we refuse or delay right or justice," originally applied only to free men, not peasants or serfs, but planted seeds for more universal legal protections. Certain crimes were considered so severe that even noble status couldn't fully protect perpetrators. High treason, for instance, often resulted in execution regardless of rank. When Thomas, Earl of Lancaster, rebelled against King Edward II, his noble status didn't save him from being beheaded in 1322. Though even here status mattered, he received a quick beheading rather than the drawing and quartering common traders faced. Some monarchs occasionally made examples of nobles to demonstrate royal power. When Louis XI of France executed Jacques de Nemers in 1477, he forced the nobleman's children to stand beneath the scaffold so their father's blood dripped onto them, a public demonstration that no one was beyond the king's justice. Perhaps most remarkably, peasant revolts occasionally forced temporary legal reckonings. During the English Peasants' Revolt of 1381, rebel leader Wat Tyler demanded not only economic concessions but legal equality. Though the revolt was crushed and its legal demands abandoned, for a brief moment the concept of equal justice regardless of birth entered public discourse. The very fact that these moments of relative equality were recorded at all speaks to how unusual they were. Chronicles and court records noted them precisely because they defied the expected order of things. So was medieval justice ever truly blind? Only in the briefest, most unusual circumstances. The exceptions serve to highlight the rule that for the vast majority of the medieval period, the law looked very carefully at who you were before deciding how to treat you. Did justice really exist in a world where your birth determined your worth before the law? And if our modern systems still show traces of treating people differently based on wealth and status, have we truly left the Middle Ages behind at all?